Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's crocodile Quirk let him control water. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. Not all men are created equal. It was a harsh, immutable truth of the world, a lesson that most learned long before they were old enough to understand the gravity of it. For some, the lesson came when they were passed over for a promotion in favor of someone with a more suited physiology. For others, it came when they watched the morning news, seeing men and women dressed in brightly colored spandex soaring through the sky, commanding the elements, and bending the laws of physics to their whims. But for children, the lesson usually arrived at the age of 4. 4 was the magic number. It was the age when the genetic lottery finally revealed its hand. It was the age when you discovered if you were destined to be a hero, a villain, or just another face in the crowd. In a society where 80% of the global population possessed a superhuman ability known as a quirk, the anticipation was a palpable, heavy thing that sat on the shoulders of every toddler. Izuku Midoriya was no different. He was a bright, exceptionally observant child with a mop of unruly green hair and large, expressive eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the world around him. His bedroom was a shrine to heroism, plastered edge to edge with posters of All Might, the symbol of peace. Izuku didn't just want a quirk, he needed one. He needed a quirk so he could save people with a fearless smile, just like his idol. As his 4th birthday came and went, the anticipation began to curdle into a quiet, gnawing anxiety. His mother, Inko, watched him with worried eyes as he stared at his hands, waiting for sparks, for telekinesis, for anything, but nothing happened. Not at first. It was mid-July, the height of a sweltering, oppressive summer. The air in Mizurufu was thick with humidity, heavy and clinging to the skin like a wet blanket. The local playground, a small patch of sand and brightly colored plastic structures, was usually a haven for the neighborhood kids. Today, it was a battleground. "You're so mean, Kaken!" Izuku's voice was high and trembling, but he forced himself to stand his ground. He held his arms out wide, his small chest heaving as he placed himself between a crying, scraped-up boy and the playground's undisputed king, Katsuki Bikugo. Katsuki smirked, his ash-blonde hair catching the harsh summer sunlight. Even at 4 years old, Katsuki carried himself with the swagger of a seasoned warlord. And why shouldn't he? His quirk had manifested weeks ago, and it was spectacular. Explosion. He secreted nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignited it at will. It was flashy, powerful, and undeniably heroic. "Mean?" Katsuki sneered, pounding his small fist into his open palm. A sharp crack echoed across the sandbox, accompanied by a flash of bright orange light and the acrid stench of burnt sugar and ozone. "I'm just putting an extra in his place." "And what are you gonna do about it, Deku? You don't even have a quirk yet. You're just a pebble." The 2 cronies standing behind Katsuki snickered. Izuku's hands balled into tiny fists. His knees knocked together, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was terrified. Katsuki's explosions hurt, but the boy behind him was crying, and heroes didn't run away. All Might wouldn't run away. I won't let you hurt him anymore," Izuku declared, his voice pitching higher. "If you keep going, I'll stop you myself." Katsuki's red eyes narrowed, a flash of genuine irritation replacing his arrogant amusement. "You stop me? Don't make me laugh, Deku!" Katsuki lunged forward. He didn't intend to seriously injure Izuku, he rarely did, but he wanted to scare him. He wanted to assert his dominance, to show this quirkless wannabe the unbridgeable gap between them. He threw a right hook, aiming to blast the dirt right at Izuku's feet. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut and raised his arms in a desperate, cross-armed block. He waited for the heat. He waited for the deafening pop and the stinging impact of displaced sand. Instead, a searing, white-hot agony erupted at the base of his spine. It was so sudden, so violently intense, that Izuku didn't even have the breath to scream. It felt as though a molten iron rod had been driven into his tailbone. His eyes snapped open, but his vision swam, the bright summer day fracturing into a dizzying kaleidoscope of colors. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud, like a thick tree branch snapping under immense pressure. It didn't come from Katsuki's hands. It came from inside Izuku. Katsuki froze mid-lunge, his crimson eyes widening in shock as he looked at the boy in front of him. Izuku collapsed to his hands and knees, gasping for air. His body convulsed. His favorite All Might t-shirt tore cleanly down the back with the sound of ripping fabric. From the base of his spine, a massive, muscular appendage burst outward. It was a tail. Thick, heavy, and armored with ridged, dark emerald scales that gleamed like polished obsidian in the sunlight. It hit the sand with a heavy, wet thud, instantly cratering the ground beneath it. Deku, Katsuki whispered, the explosive bravado draining from his face. But it wasn't stopping. The agony was spreading, rushing through Izuku's veins like liquid ice. He looked down at his small, trembling hands. The pale peach skin of his forearms was bubbling, shifting. Within seconds, patches of thick, overlapping green scales erupted along his arms, wrapping around his wrists and forearms like ancient, organic gauntlets. Similar armored plating tore through the fabric of his shorts, encasing his shins and calves. His jaw burned. He clamped his mouth shut, tasting the sudden, metallic tang of his own blood as his teeth shifted, elongating into sharp, serrated fangs that pressed uncomfortably against his bottom lip. His skull ached, his senses going into overdrive. The world around him changed. He could suddenly feel the heavy humidity in the air. He could feel the moisture trapped in the sand, the water vapor clinging to the leaves of the nearby oak trees. It was a suffocating pressure, an itch beneath his skin that demanded to be scratched. A low, guttural hiss vibrated in Izuku's throat, a sound that didn't belong to a 4-year-old boy. It sounded prehistoric. Primal. What is that? One of Katsuki's lackeys shrieked, stumbling backward and falling onto his backside. Izuku couldn't answer. He was drowning in his own body. The pain was fading, replaced by a terrifying, boundless surge of energy. He felt cornered. He felt threatened. The primal part of his newly rewired brain looked at Katsuki, the source of the loud noises and bright flashes, and registered him not as a childhood friend, but as a threat. Izuku's head snapped up. Katsuki stumbled back. The kid he had bullied, the pebble, was looking at him with eyes that were no longer human. The wide, innocent emerald irises had narrowed into vertical, predatory slits, glowing with a luminescent, golden-green light. His lower jaw was speckled with hardened scales, and a low growl rumbled from his chest, vibrating the very air between them. Make the threat go away. The thought wasn't Izuku's. It was an instinct, raw and unfiltered. Izuku threw his hands out, crying out in a mixture of terror and confusion. He didn't know what he was doing, but the humidity in the air answered his call. The oppressive summer heat seemed to shatter. The ambient moisture in the atmosphere, drawn by an invisible, magnetic pull, violently condensed. Boom! It wasn't an explosion of fire, but of water. A massive, swirling dome of highly pressurized water erupted from Izuku's small body. It expanded outward with the force of a localized hurricane. The water crashed into Katsuki and his lackeys, sweeping them off their feet and throwing them several yards across the playground. The deluge didn't stop there. It flooded the sandbox, washing away toys and leveling sandcastles. It tore through the swing set, the sheer pressure bending the metal chains. For 10 terrifying seconds, the playground was submerged in a torrential, unnatural flash flood, swirling around the small, scaled boy at its epicenter. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the instinct snapped. Izuku gasped, the golden slits in his eyes widening back into a semblance of their normal shape. The control over the water vanished, and the massive dome collapsed, crashing to the ground in a torrential downpour that soaked the park in an instant. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of rushing water draining into the nearby street gutters. Izuku knelt in the mud, shivering despite the summer heat. He looked at his hands, his monstrous, scaly, clawed hands. He looked behind him, his eyes tracing the length of the massive, ridged tail that twitched involuntarily in the dirt. He looked up. Katsuki was sitting in a puddle a dozen yards away, soaked to the bone, coughing up water. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo wasn't looking at Izuku Midoriya with pity or disdain. He was looking at him with wide, unadulterated awe. And a healthy dose of fear. "Mommy!" Izuku whimpered, a tear rolling down his cheek. I'm a monster." The pristine white walls of the hospital waiting room did little to calm Inko Midoriya's fraying nerves. She sat on the edge of the hard plastic chair, her hands wringing a damp tissue into absolute shreds. When she had received the phone call from the playground supervisor, her heart had nearly stopped. Izuku was in an accident. Izuku's quirk manifested. There was a flood. He's unharmed, but you need to come immediately. Now, sitting in the specialized quirk counseling and pediatrics ward of Muzurifu General Hospital, she felt entirely out of her depth. The door to the examination room opened, and Dr. Kyudai Garaki stepped out. He was a short, rotund man with a bushy mustache, thick goggles that obscured his eyes, and a perfectly bald head. He carried a clipboard, his expression one of intense, clinical fascination. "Mrs. Midoriya?" Dr. Garaki called out, his voice a gravelly baritone. Inko shot to her feet, nearly tripping over her own heels. "Yes. That's me. Is my Izuku okay? What happened to him?" The woman on the phone said something about a flood and scales. Dr. Garaki gestured for her to follow him into his office. "Calm yourself, Mrs. Midoriya. Your son is perfectly healthy. In fact, he is quite remarkable." Inko followed the doctor into the dimly lit office. On the wall, a series of X-rays and biological scans were illuminated. Inko gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth. The skeleton on the X-ray was undeniably human, but with drastic alterations. The jawbone was thicker, lined with what looked like rows of serrated teeth. The spine extended far past the pelvis, comprised of dense, muscular vertebrae that formed a massive tail. "As you know," Dr. Garaki began, taking a seat behind his desk and gesturing to the scans, quirks generally fall into three categories: emitter, transformer, and mutant. Usually, a child inherits one of these classifications, either a direct copy of a parent's quirk or a slight variation. You have a minor telekinetic emitter quirk, and your husband has a fire-breathing emitter quirk. Correct? Inko nodded numbly. Yes. We expected Izuku to have something similar. Maybe drawing small objects to himself, or breathing hot air. Dr. Garaki chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Genetics is a fascinating, unpredictable science, Mrs. Midoriya. Every so often, the genetic markers don't just blend, they mutate, reaching back into the ancestral DNA pool and pulling forward dormant traits, combining them with the active ones. Your son is a textbook example of a highly rare, hybridized quirk. He tapped a pen against the X-ray of the tail. Classification 1 Mutant. Izuku has undergone a drastic physiological metamorphosis. He has developed the traits of a crocodilian predator. The dermal plating, the scales, on his forearms, lower legs, back, and jaw are incredibly dense. They will act as natural armor. The tail is heavily muscled, capable of immense kinetic force. His dental structure has shifted, and his eyes possess a tapetum lucidum, granting him exceptional night vision and motion tracking. His physical strength will naturally eclipse that of an average human. Inko's head was spinning. A crocodile? Essentially, Garaki nodded. But that is only half the equation. Classification 2, Emitter. The doctor tapped a keyboard, bringing up a video file on his monitor. It was security footage from a camera near the playground. Inko watched in stunned silence as her tiny, 4-year-old son suddenly erupted into a dome of raging water, washing away several older children with the force of a tidal wave. Hydrokinesis, Dr. Garaki said, his voice laced with awe. He doesn't just manipulate existing water. His body acts as a focal point, drawing ambient moisture from the atmosphere, condensing it, and expelling it at high pressures. He can generate water, shape it, and control it. We believe this is a drastic, mutated combination of your husband's breath expulsion quirk and your telekinetic attraction quirk, filtered through the biological lens of a semi-aquatic predator. Inko felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. It was too much. So, he has two quirks? No, it is a singular quirk with a dual nature. A mutant/emitter hybrid. If I were to register it, I would call it something akin to Sobek, after the Egyptian crocodile deity, or perhaps river tyrant. Dr. Garaki leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. However, Mrs. Midoriya, I must warn you. Power like this comes with biological drawbacks. Inko swallowed hard. Drawbacks? Yes. Firstly, his hydrokinesis relies heavily on atmospheric moisture and his body's internal water reserves. If he produces too much water without a natural source nearby, he risks severe, life-threatening dehydration. He will need to drink copious amounts of water daily. Dr. Garaki adjusted his goggles. Secondly, his mutant physiology. Crocodilians are ectothermic, cold-blooded, while Izuku is still mammalian and produces his own body heat. His quirk has heavily influenced his thermoregulation. Extreme cold will severely lethargize him. If his core temperature drops, his physical and mental faculties will slow to a crawl. He could easily slip into a state of torpor. Keep him warm and hydrated. I can do that, Inko whispered, gripping her purse tightly. Is that all? Dr. Garaki hesitated, a rare moment of caution in his clinical demeanor. Physiologically, yes. Psychologically, you must be observant. Izuku's brain chemistry has been slightly altered to accommodate his new instincts. He possesses the traits of an apex predator. Under extreme stress, adrenaline, or the scent of blood, his predatory instincts may attempt to override his rational thought. He will need to learn ironclad control, lest he become a danger to himself or others. Inko's heart broke. A danger to others? Her sweet, sensitive boy who cried when he stepped on a bug? It seemed impossible. May I see him now? She asked, her voice trembling. Of course. He's in observation room 3. Inko practically sprinted down the sterile hallway. When she reached room 3, she stopped in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. Izuku was sitting on the edge of the oversized examination table. The hospital had given him a gown, but they had to cut a large hole in the back to accommodate the thick, scaly tail that hung limply toward the floor. His small arms were resting on his lap, the dark emerald scales stark and alien against the pale hospital sheets. He was staring at a small, handheld mirror the nurse had left behind. He was looking at his teeth, at the hardened scales dotting his jawline, at the slitted pupils in his eyes. He looked up when Inko entered. His eyes were red and puffy from crying. Mom? He whispered, his voice catching. He touched his cheek, his sharp claws lightly scratching the scales. The doctor said this won't go away. This is my quirk. Inko slowly walked toward him, fighting back her own tears. She had to be strong. For him. It's a very powerful quirk, Izuku, she said softly, kneeling before him so they were at eye level. Izuku's lip quivered. He dropped the mirror onto the bed. But look at me, Mom. Heroes don't look like this. All Might smiles, and he looks bright and safe. I look. He choked on a sob. I look like a villain. I'm a monster. I scared Kaken. I hurt people with the water. I can't be a hero if I'm a scary monster. The dam broke. Izuku wailed, throwing his hands over his face, his thick tail curling inward as if trying to hide himself. Inko didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch at the scales, or the claws, or the monstrous tail. She wrapped her arms around her son, pulling his small, trembling body into a fierce, desperate embrace. She buried her face in his messy green curls, letting her own tears fall freely. Listen to me, Izuku, she whispered fiercely, pulling back just enough to look him in his glowing, slit-pupil eyes. You are not a monster, but my face is handsome, she interrupted, cupping his scaly cheek. The scales were smooth, cool to the touch, and incredibly hard. Do you know what this is, Izuku? This isn't a villain's face. This is armor. Izuku sniffled, his eyes widening slightly. Armor? Yes, Inko said, forcing a warm, watery smile. A hero's job is dangerous. They fight bad guys and go into scary places to save people. The universe knew you had such a big, brave heart, Izuku. It knew you were going to throw yourself into danger to help others. So, it gave you heroic armor to keep you safe. You have a shield right on your skin, and the power of the oceans at your fingertips. Izuku looked down at his arms, turning them over. Heroic armor? Exactly, Inko nodded, kissing his forehead. You can be a hero, Izuku. You are going to be a brilliant, strong hero, and anyone who looks at you and sees a monster just doesn't know what a real hero looks like. Izuku stared at his mother. The storm of panic and self-loathing that had been raging in his chest since the park began to settle. He looked back at the mirror. He saw the scales, the fangs, the terrifying eyes. But then he remembered the feeling of the water. The absolute, undeniable power he had felt when the moisture answered his call. If he could control it, if he could use this power to protect people, to wash away the bad guys. A small, toothy smile broke across Izuku's face. It was sharp, a little predatory, but filled with the familiar, boundless determination that Inko loved so much. "I'm gonna be a hero, Mom," Izuku whispered, his tail giving a small, hesitant wag that knocked a metal tray off a nearby table with a loud clatter. Izuku flinched, looking at the mess. "Oops," Inko laughed, wiping her eyes. "We're going to have to move the fragile things to higher shelves, aren't we?" The transition to life with a mutant/emitter Quirk was not graceful. For the first few months, the Midoriya household was a hazard zone. Izuku's spatial awareness was completely thrown off by the addition of a 4-foot, 50-pound tail. He knocked over floor lamps, swept magazines off coffee tables, and accidentally tripped his mother more times than he could count. Chairs became a nightmare. Inko had to buy special stools or cut out the backs of their dining chairs so Izuku could sit comfortably. Sleeping was another issue. Izuku couldn't lie on his back anymore. He had to learn to sleep on his side or his stomach, his tail curled around his legs for warmth. And then there was the cold. As autumn bled into winter, Inko noticed the drastic change Dr. Garaki had warned about. On particularly chilly mornings, Izuku was almost catatonic. He would drag his feet, his speech slurred and his eyes half closed. His usually vibrant green scales would dull to an ashy olive color. Inko quickly invested in heavy thermal undergarments, heated blankets, and portable space heaters for his room. She practically bundled him into a walking marshmallow before letting him step outside for school. His new diet was also a shock. Izuku was always thirsty. He carried a massive, 1-gallon insulated water jug with him everywhere he went, sipping from it constantly. His appetite for meat skyrocketed, his jaw easily tearing through tough cuts of beef that would have given a normal child a stomachache. But the most difficult adjustment was psychological. Izuku was a gentle soul, prone to muttering, analyzing, and overthinking. But the Quirk had introduced a new roommate into his head, the Predator. He first noticed it clearly when he was 5. He had tripped on the sidewalk and scraped his knee. As the blood welled up, the metallic scent hit his nose. Instantly, a bizarre, thrilling rush of adrenaline spiked through his veins. His pupils dilated into pinpricks, his heart rate slowed to a steady, rhythmic thud, and his jaw locked. For 10 terrifying seconds he didn't feel pain. He felt the urge to hunt, to bite, to thrash. It took his mother shaking his shoulder to snap him out of it. From that day on, Izuku realized he had to actively guard his own mind. He began to practice meditation, using his analytical muttering as a grounding technique to keep the beast locked in a cage of logic and reason. However, the change in his physical appearance and power completely shattered the social hierarchy of his neighborhood. In a world of quirks, mutant types often faced a subtle, insidious form of discrimination. They were looked at differently, their humanity often questioned by those with flashy, clean emitter quirks. When Izuku returned to preschool, the other children were terrified of him. The scales, the sharp teeth, the heavy tail that dragged behind him. He looked like a kaiju villain from a Saturday morning cartoon. For a few days, Izuku sat alone. The whispers followed him. Monster. Scary. Lizard freak. He tried to keep his head down, clutching his water jug, repeating his mother's words in his head. Heroic armor. Heroic armor. Then Katsuki Bakugo approached him. It was during recess. Izuku was sitting by the swing set, drawing a picture of All Might in his notebook. He felt a shadow fall over him and looked up. Katsuki was standing there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his red eyes glaring down at Izuku. The two cronies were nowhere to be seen. Katsuki had left them behind. Izuku tensed. His tail instinctively curled around his legs, the scales on his arms shifting slightly as his body prepared for an attack. The predator in the back of his mind hissed, urging him to strike first. Izuku shoved the instinct down, gripping his crayon tightly. Kaken, Izuku said softly. Katsuki didn't say anything at first. He just stared at Izuku, his eyes tracing the thick scales on Izuku's arms, the sharp contour of his jaw, and the massive tail resting on the wood chips. Katsuki remembered the park. He remembered the feeling of absolute helplessness as tons of pressurized water had slammed into him. He remembered the golden, slitted eyes looking at him as if he were nothing more than prey. Katsuki Bakugo's entire worldview was built on the foundation of absolute victory. He was the strongest. He was the best. He was the one who looked down on others. But looking at Izuku now, Katsuki didn't feel superiority. He felt threatened. And to Katsuki, a threat wasn't something to ignore. A threat was a challenge. You think you're hot stuff now, huh? Katsuki finally spoke, his voice lacking the mocking, bullying tone of the past. It was hard, serious, and laced with a fierce, burning intensity. Izuku blinked, confused. What? Your quirk, Katsuki said, stepping closer. Small sparks popped across his palms, not in an attempt to attack, but as a nervous tick of his own power. You got a flashy quirk. You think because you can make a little puddle and you got some ugly armor, you're better than me? Izuku scrambled to his feet, dropping his notebook. No, Kaken, I never said that. I don't think I'm better than anyone, I just... Shut up! Katsuki snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at Izuku's chest. You were holding out on me. You made me look like an idiot at the park. But don't think for a second that this changes anything. I'm still gonna be the #1 hero. I'm gonna surpass All Might, and I'm sure as hell gonna surpass a swamp monster like you. Izuku stared at Katsuki. The dynamic had shifted completely. Katsuki wasn't calling him a pebble anymore. He wasn't dismissing him. Katsuki was acknowledging him as a rival. A spark of something new ignited in Izuku's chest. For years, he had followed behind Katsuki, admiring his strength from the shadow of his own quirklessness. He had idolized Katsuki's confidence, but now, standing eye to eye with him, feeling the heavy, dense muscle of his own body and the thrum of water waiting just beneath his skin, Izuku realized he didn't need to follow Katsuki anymore. He could stand beside him. He could stand against him. Izuku's posture changed. The nervous hunch in his shoulders vanished. He stood up straight, letting his tail uncoil and rest heavily on the ground behind him, anchoring him like the roots of a great tree. His lips parted, revealing the sharp points of his fangs, and he met Katsuki's fiery red gaze with his own glowing, golden slits. I'm not going to lose to you, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a calm, rolling thunder that surprised even himself. I'm going to be a hero who saves everyone with a smile, and if you get in my way, I'll wash you out. Katsuki's eyes widened fractionally at the declaration, but then a feral, manic grin stretched across his face. He slammed his fists together, a large explosion crackling through the air. Try it, Deku! Katsuki roared, the nickname no longer meaning useless, but morphing into a battle cry. I'll boil your damn water and blast your scales off. From that day forward, the bullying ceased, replaced by a rivalry so intense and aggressively competitive that it gave their elementary school teachers premature gray hair. Every test, every physical education class, every recess was a battlefield. If Katsuki ran a mile in 7 minutes, Izuku ran it in 6.5. If Izuku got 100% on a math test, Katsuki demanded extra credit to get 110. Their quirks grew alongside them, shaping their fighting styles and their personalities. Katsuki became explosive, kinetic, and utterly relentless. He moved like a comet, fast and destructive, relying on overwhelming offensive power and razor-sharp reflexes. Izuku, conversely, became something entirely different. As he aged through elementary and into middle school, his body filled out dramatically to support the weight of his mutations. By the time he was 14, he was built like a heavyweight boxer. His chest and shoulders were broad, layered with dense muscle, and his forearms and shins were permanently encased in thick, impenetrable green scales. His tail had grown to nearly 6 feet in length, powerful enough to shatter concrete with a casual swipe. But it was his mastery over his hydrokinesis that made him truly formidable. Izuku approached his quirk with the mind of a scientist. He realized early on that brute-forcing giant waves of water, like he had done at the park, was incredibly inefficient. It drained his internal hydration reserves dangerously fast and left him exhausted. Instead, he focused on pressure and control. He spent countless hours at the local beach, cleaning up the illegal trash dumps not just for community service, but as target practice. He learned how to draw moisture from the sea breeze, condensing it into a sphere of water hovering in his palm. Then, he would compress it. He would force the water molecules closer and closer together, increasing the pressure until the water vibrated with kinetic energy. With a flick of his wrist, he could fire a stream of water so highly pressurized that it could slice cleanly through an abandoned refrigerator. He learned to use his tail as a counterbalance, allowing him to perform acrobatic, fluid movements that defied his bulky frame. He learned to secrete a thin layer of water over his scales, making him frictionless and allowing him to slide across solid ground at terrifying speeds, like a crocodile lunging from the riverbank. And crucially, he learned to control the beast. The predatory instincts never went away. They lurked in the dark corners of his mind, waiting for the scent of fear or blood. But Izuku built a fortress around them. He used his notebooks, hero analysis for the future, to channel his hyper-observant, predatory tracking skills into tactical analysis. When he looked at an opponent, his instincts told him where their weak points were, where their arteries lay, how they balanced their weight. Izuku translated those savage instincts into combat data, anticipating movements and countering with surgical precision. Despite his fearsome appearance, Izuku Midoriya remained, at his core, a gentle, anxious nerd. He still muttered incessantly. He still collected All Might merchandise with a religious fervor. He still blushed furiously and stammered when girls spoke to him. It was a walking paradox. He was a terrifying, scaly, apex predator capable of localized natural disasters, who also happened to wear a bright yellow backpack and cried during sad movies. As the final year of Aldera Junior High began, the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew what the end of the year meant. The UA High School entrance exam was looming on the horizon, the proving ground for the next generation of heroes. Izuku sat at his desk in the back of the classroom, absent-mindedly chewing on the end of his pencil. The wood splintered easily under his sharp teeth, a bad habit he had never quite managed to break. He was staring out the window, watching the rain beat against the glass. The rain always made him feel energetic. He could feel the moisture in the air, a comforting blanket that seemed to hum in tune with his heartbeat. He let out a soft sigh, a small puff of water vapor escaping his lips. "You're all third years now," the homeroom teacher announced, slapping a stack of career aptitude papers onto his desk. "It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I would hand out these future career forms, but I assume you all want to be heroes." The classroom erupted in cheers. Students activated their quirks, showing off glowing hands, extending limbs, and minor elemental parlor tricks. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks," the teacher chuckled, waving them down. "But remember, using your quirks during school hours is against the rules." "Hey, teach!" The loud, abrasive voice cut through the chatter like a knife. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, resting his feet on his desk. He smirked, his red eyes sweeping over the classroom with absolute disdain. "Don't lump me in with these background characters. They'll be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm the real deal." The class erupted in angry protests, but Katsuki just laughed, tiny explosions popping in his palms. "Bring it on, extras! I'll take you all on." "Ah, Bakugo," the teacher said, adjusting his glasses. "You're aiming for UA High, aren't you?" A hushed silence fell over the room. UA was the pinnacle of hero education. The acceptance rate was abysmally low. "That's exactly right," Katsuki declared, standing up and slamming his hands on his desk. "I aced the mock test. I'm the only one at this crappy school who's got the chops to make it into UA. I'm gonna surpass All Might and become the top hero." "Oh," the teacher looked down at his clipboard. "Midoriya, you're going for UA too, aren't you?" The silence that followed was entirely different from the one for Katsuki. The class slowly turned to look at the back of the room. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He slowly pulled the splintered pencil from his mouth and set it on the desk. He looked up, his golden slit pupils glowing faintly in the dim lighting of the rainy classroom. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked him. They all remembered the time an older high school gang had tried to shake down some Aldera students near the arcade. Izuku had stepped in. He hadn't even used his water. He had simply grabbed the gang leader's baseball bat, crushed the aluminum like a soda can in his scaled grip, and growled. The gang had scattered like frightened mice. Katsuki slowly turned his head. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a scowl so intense it could have melted glass. Deku, Katsuki growled, his voice low and dangerous. Kaken, Izuku replied evenly, his heavy tail shifting beneath his desk with a quiet rustle of scales. You think you can compete with me on the big stage? Katsuki challenged, stepping into the aisle. You think Yui wants a reptile? Izuku picked up a fresh pencil, twirling it deftly between his clawed fingers. He met Katsuki's glare head-on. Yui wants heroes. And I'm going to be the best one there. Don't fall behind, Kaken. A vein throbbed in Katsuki's forehead. He looked like he wanted to blow the entire classroom to kingdom come, but he restrained himself. He spun on his heel, marching back to his desk. Just you wait, Deku. The entrance exam is gonna prove once and for all who the Alpha is. Izuku smiled slightly, turning his attention back to the rainy window. The Alpha. Kaken was always obsessed with dominance. But Izuku knew the truth about nature. Explosions were loud. They were flashy. They demanded attention. But water? Water was patient. Water carved through mountains. Water swallowed entire cities. And Izuku Midoriya was the storm waiting to break. The final bell of the day rang, signaling freedom. The rain had cleared up, leaving the afternoon air crisp and cool. Izuku packed his notebooks into his yellow backpack, slinging it over one massive, scaled shoulder. He decided to take the long way home. He needed to clear his head. The confrontation with Katsuki had stirred up his blood, and the predator in his mind was restless, pacing back and forth in its metaphorical cage. He needed a distraction. His phone buzzed. It was an alert from a Hero News app. Villain incident in Tatooine shopping district. MT. Lady in Kamiri Woods on scene. Izuku's eyes widened. A villain fight. And new heroes, too. He practically vibrated with excitement, the terrifying apex predator instantly replaced by an enthusiastic fanboy. He tightened his grip on the straps of his backpack and broke into a jog, his heavy footfalls echoing off the pavement. To take a shortcut, he ducked under a large, shaded overpass. The shadows here were deep, the air damp and smelling of stagnant water and mildew. Izuku's heightened senses picked up on the anomaly immediately. He stopped walking. The ambient moisture in the tunnel was off. It was too dense. And it smelled wrong. Not like rain or puddles. It smelled like sewage. Like rotting organic matter. A quiet, squelching sound echoed from behind him. Slosh. Slop. Slosh. Izuku's eyes widened. He dropped his backpack and spun around, his body dropping into a low, defensive crouch, his tail whipping back to counterbalance his weight. Rising from a manhole cover in the center of the tunnel was a monstrosity. It had no fixed shape, composed entirely of dark, viscous, foul-smelling sludge. Two massive, bulbous eyes rolled around in the muck, accompanied by a jagged, gaping maw filled with broken teeth. Well, 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 the sludge villain gurgled, its voice wet and guttural. A medium-sized meat suit. You look a little tough to crack with all those scales, kid, but I'm in a hurry. Don't fight it. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds, and then it'll all be over. The villain lunged, a massive wave of sludge surging forward like a tsunami of mud, aiming directly for Izuku's mouth and nose. The strategy was obvious. Invade the respiratory system, suffocate the host, and take control from the inside out. Against a normal human, it was a flawless, lethal tactic. But Izuku Midoriya was not a normal human. And you do not attack the river tyrant with liquid. Time seemed to slow down. The predator in Izuku's mind didn't just wake up, it roared to life, shattering the cage. Adrenaline flooded his system, turning his blood to fire. The golden slits in his eyes expanded, glowing with terrifying intensity in the dim light of the tunnel. Prey. The word echoed in Izuku's mind, but he fought it down. No! Not prey. Villain. Neutralize. Survive. As the sludge enveloped him, wrapping around his scaly arms and forcing its way toward his face. Izuku didn't panic. He opened his mouth, but not to scream. He tapped into the ambient moisture, reaching out with his quirk. But he didn't pull water from the air. He reached into the villain itself. The sludge villain was composed of a high percentage of fluid. It was murky, toxic, and vile, but at a molecular level, it still contained water. Izuku's hydrokinesis flared. He asserted dominance over the liquid enveloping him. The sludge villain suddenly shrieked, its bulbous eyes widening in absolute horror. What? What are you doing? I can't move. Why can't I move? Izuku stood up, ignoring the sludge that clung to his chest. He raised his clawed hands. With a savage, tearing motion, he used his quirk to forcibly rip the sludge away from his face and neck. The water inside the villain obeyed Izuku's command, tearing the villain's viscous body apart against its will. Izuku took a deep breath of clean air, glaring at the struggling mass of sludge. You picked the wrong alley, villain, Izuku growled, his voice vibrating with predatory malice. He didn't need to generate a water jet. He didn't need to summon a dome. He simply reeled back his massive, scaled tail. He coated the heavy appendage in a dense, pressurized layer of ambient moisture, turning the scales into a frictionless, unbreakable blunt instrument. Izuku pivoted on his heel, generating immense torque from his hips and legs. Smayas! Wait! Izuku hadn't yelled that. Before Izuku could unleash his tail whip, the manhole cover exploded upward with the force of a bomb. A massive figure shot into the tunnel, moving faster than the eye could track. Fear not, citizen! A booming voice echoed, shaking the very foundation of the overpass. For I am here, All Might. The symbol of peace stood in the dim light, a mountain of muscle wrapped in a white t-shirt and cargo pants. He pulled back his fist, the air pressure around his arm distorting. Texas. Smash! All Might threw the punch. The sheer wind pressure generated by the strike hit the tunnel like a localized tornado. The sludge villain, already destabilized and torn apart by Izuku's hydrokinesis, stood no chance. The villain was quite literally blown to pieces, the liquid splattering violently against the walls and ceiling of the tunnel. The wind pressure hit Izuku too. He dug his claws into the concrete, his heavy tail slamming into the ground to anchor himself against the gale-force winds. He squeezed his eyes shut as dirt and debris flew past him. When the wind finally died down, Izuku slowly opened his eyes. The tunnel was quiet. The sludge villain was nothing more than splatters of muck slowly sliding down the concrete walls. And standing a few feet away, holding a pair of empty soda bottles, was his idol, the man he had admired since he was in diapers. All Might quickly began scooping the villain's remains into the plastic bottles, moving with practiced efficiency. Izuku couldn't speak. His jaw hung open, his fangs visible. The predatory instinct evaporated instantly, replaced by absolute, starstruck All Might? Izuku squeaked, his voice pitching high. All Might finished capping the second bottle and turned around, flashing his trademark, blinding smile. Ha ha! Yes, it is I. I apologize for involving you in my villain hunt, young man, but you held your own quite well. I saw you repelling his attack. An impressive display of power. Izuku felt like he was going to pass out. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his notebook from his fallen backpack. Please. Can I get an autograph? You're my hero. I have all your merchandise. I've studied all your fights. All Might let out a booming laugh, taking the notebook and signing it with blinding speed. Of course, my boy. Always happy to meet a fan. Izuku took the notebook back, bowing deeply. Thank you? Thank you so much. It will be a family heirloom. Now, I must be off. All Might declared, securing the bottles in his pockets. These streets won't protect themselves. Stay safe, young man. All Might crouched down, preparing to leap. In that split second, a desperate, nagging thought pierced Izuku's mind. He had the quirk. He had the power. He was going to try for Yue. But there was a fundamental difference between him and All Might. All Might was a beacon of light. He was human. He inspired hope. Izuku, despite his mother's reassurances, still saw the monster in the mirror. He still felt the cold-blooded urge to hunt when the adrenaline spiked. He needed to know. He needed to hear it from the greatest hero in the world. As All Might's legs coiled like springs, Izuku stepped forward, his tail swishing anxiously behind him. "Wait!" Izuku called out. I have a question." "No time, my boy. Pro-heroes are constantly fighting time," All Might replied, looking up at the gap in the overpass. "Can someone like me?" Izuku shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Can someone with the body of a monster, someone who feels the urge to hunt, can someone like that really become a hero like you?" All Might paused. He relaxed his legs slightly, turning his head to look at the boy. He really looked at him this time. He saw the dark green, armored scales. He saw the sharp, serrated fangs and the heavy, crocodilian tail. He saw the vertical, golden slit pupils. By all societal metrics, it was a terrifying, villainous mutation. But All Might didn't see a monster. He saw a 14-year-old boy trembling with anxiety, clutching a notebook like a lifeline, his eyes shining with a desperate, vulnerable hope. Before All Might could answer, a sharp, searing pain erupted in his left side. He coughed, a small spatter of blood landing on the concrete. His time limit? He was out of time. He had to go, now, before he deflated in front of this kid. "I'm sorry, young man," All Might forced out, his voice straining slightly. "But I must go." With a massive leap, All Might shot into the sky, leaving a crater in the concrete and a disappointed, scaly teenager behind. Izuku stood in the tunnel, looking up at the sky where All Might had vanished. He felt a pang of disappointment, but he shook his head. He couldn't blame All Might. The number one hero was busy. He picked up his backpack, brushing the dirt off his uniform. He began the walk home, his mind racing. He had survived a villain attack. He had met All Might. And he had an autograph. Despite the unanswered question, it was a good day. But as Izuku walked out of the tunnel and back into the sunlight, he didn't notice the small, green plastic bottle lying in the shadows near the crater All Might had left behind. The cap was slightly loose, and inside the dark, viscous sludge was already beginning to seep out, desperate for revenge. The day was far from over. And the river tyrant's true test was about to begin. The walk home from the overpass felt like traversing a dream. Izuku Midori applauded along the sun-baked sidewalk, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. In his right hand, he clutched his damp, slightly crinkled notebook, his thumb tracing the bold, sweeping strokes of All Might's signature. He signed it. He actually signed it. The sheer, unadulterated joy of a lifelong fanboy bubbled in his chest, fighting a warring faction of lingering anxiety. Can someone with the body of a monster, someone who feels the urge to hunt, can someone like that really become a hero like you? All Might hadn't answered. The symbol of peace had leaped away, bound for the sky, leaving Izuku standing in the shadows with his terrifying reflection and a million unanswered fears. Izuku let out a long, heavy sigh, a small cloud of steam escaping his jagged teeth. He dragged his feet, the thick, armor-plated soles of his custom-made red sneakers scuffing the concrete. Behind him, his massive, crocodilian tail swayed with a hypnotic, rhythmic thud. It was a heavy appendage, easily over 50 pounds of dense muscle, bone, and dark green scales. Over the years, carrying it had sculpted Izuku's core and legs into thick, unyielding pillars of strength. He didn't just walk, he marched, an inescapable physical presence that demanded space. The afternoon sun beat down on his shoulders, the humidity of the earlier rain burning off into a sticky, suffocating heat. Izuku reached for the gallon jug of water slung across his chest, unscrewing the cap and taking a long, desperate gulp. The cool liquid slid down his throat, replenishing the internal reserves he had tapped into during his brief scuffle with the sludge villain. I used my quirk against the villain, Izuku thought, the realization sending a thrill of terror down his spine. I used my water to tear him off me. If the pros had seen me, I could have been arrested for illegal quirk usage. But what else was he supposed to do? Let the creature suffocate him? Let himself become a meat suit? At the memory of the villain's vile, sewage-like stench, the hairs on the back of Izuku's neck stood on end. His tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer in his eyes, flared slightly, his pupils narrowing into sharp golden slits for a fraction of a second. Deep within the recesses of his mind, the primal, cold-blooded predator paced in its cage. It had tasted the thrill of combat. It had felt the intoxicating rush of asserting dominance over a threat. Izuku closed his eyes, inhaling deeply and forcing his heart rate to slow. No. Lock it down. I'm not a beast. I'm a hero. I'm Izuku. He muttered a string of calming statistics about hero billboard rankings, grounding himself in his nerdy, analytical reality until his pupils widened back into rounded ovals. Just as he turned the corner onto the main thoroughfare of the Tatooine shopping district, a deafening roar shattered the tranquil afternoon. Boom! The ground beneath Izuku's feet shuddered. A shockwave rattled the glass windows of the nearby storefronts, followed immediately by the billowing ascent of thick, black smoke into the summer sky. Izuku froze. His head snapped toward the source of the explosion. The scent hit his highly developed olfactory glands a second later. It wasn't just the smell of burning plastic and shattered concrete. It was sharp, acrid, and unmistakable. It smelled like burnt sugar and ozone. It smelled like nitroglycerin. Kakin? Before his rational mind could process the danger, Izuku's body was already moving. His powerful legs, accustomed to propelling his heavy frame with explosive force, launched him forward. His tail lifted off the ground, acting as an aerodynamic rudder as he sprinted down the street, his red shoes pounding a frantic, heavy rhythm against the asphalt. He rounded the corner of the shopping arcade and skidded to a halt, his claws involuntarily extending and scoring deep gouges into the pavement. The scene was pure, unadulterated chaos. A large section of the Tatooine shopping district was entirely engulfed in roaring orange flames. Storefronts had been blasted open, debris littering the street. A massive crowd of onlookers had gathered behind a flimsy yellow police barricade, their faces illuminated by the fires, holding up their smartphones to record the disaster. Izuku pushed his way to the front of the crowd, using his sheer mass and the imposing presence of his scaly arms to part the sea of people. "Excuse me. Let me through. Please." When he broke the tree line of the crowd, his heart plummeted into his stomach. Standing in the center of the inferno, having grown to almost 3 times the size it had been in the tunnel, was the sludge villain. Its bulbous, manic eyes darted around, its gelatinous body undulating as it lashed out with thick whips of highly corrosive mud, smashing a nearby lamppost in half. No, Izuku thought, his breath catching in his throat. It can't be. All Might caught him. He put him in the bottles. Izuku's mind raced back to the overpass. The wind pressure. All Might's sudden pained cough. The way he had held his side before leaping away. The bottle must have fallen. It fell out of his pocket, and I didn't notice. This is my fault. I distracted him. The guilt hit Izuku like a physical blow, heavy and suffocating. But the horror didn't stop there. Stay back. The villain roared, its voice gargling with malice. I've got a prime meat suit now. Once I take full control of this kid's quirk, none of you capes will be able to touch me. Izuku squinted through the smoke and shimmering heat waves. Trapped within the undulating mass of sludge, struggling violently, was a teenager in a black school uniform. Ash blonde hair, furious red eyes, and hands that were sparking with desperate, continuous explosions. Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki's explosions were what had caused the fires. The villain was using Katsuki's quirk against his will, holding him hostage while simultaneously keeping the pro-heroes at bay. Izuku looked frantically at the heroes gathered at the perimeter. Death Arms, a hero with immense physical strength, was punching his fists together but refusing to step into the flames. Kamui Woods, the rising star with a wood manipulation quirk, was completely neutralized. His wooden limbs would ignite the second he stepped near the inferno. Empty Lady, the giantess, was stuck in the narrow street, complaining that she didn't have the clearance to expand. We can't do anything. Death Arms shouted over the roar of the fire. There's no water to put out the flames. Backdraft is busy keeping the fire from spreading to the residential block. We have to wait for someone with a suitable quirk. Wait! Izuku's mind screamed. They're going to wait? Izuku looked back at the villain. Katsuki's head was mostly submerged in the toxic sludge. The villain was forcing its way into Katsuki's mouth and nose, suffocating him. Katsuki's explosions were growing weaker, the deafening cracks reducing to erratic, desperate pops. Through the thick smoke and the thrashing sludge, Katsuki's eyes locked onto Izuku's in the crowd. For the last 10 years, Katsuki Bakugo had looked at Izuku with annoyance, with fiery rivalry, with intense, paranoid competition. But right now, in this singular, agonizing moment, the fierce, unyielding pride in Katsuki's red eyes was gone. He was drowning. He was terrified. He was pleading for help. Something inside Izuku Midoriya shattered. It wasn't the cage holding the beast. It was the chains of his own anxiety. The heat of the surrounding fires was intense. As an ectotherm, the extreme, dry heat without moisture was beginning to severely dehydrate the air, making Izuku's scales feel tight and brittle. His hydrokinesis thrived on ambient moisture, but the fire had evaporated nearly all of it. If he fought now, he would have to use his own internal hydration. He would have to bleed his own water. It didn't matter. Izuku dropped his heavy backpack. He dropped his gallon water jug. He moved. Before his rational brain could formulate a plan, before the pro-heroes could shout a warning, Izuku vaulted over the police barricade. Hey! Kid, stop! Are you crazy? Death Arms bellowed, reaching out, but his fingers only grazed the hardened scales of Izuku's tail. Izuku didn't run like a human. He dropped onto all fours, his powerful, scaly arms and thick legs digging into the asphalt. His tail whipped behind him for balance, and he propelled himself forward with the terrifying, explosive speed of a crocodile lunging from the riverbank. He closed the distance between the crowd and the villain in less than 3 seconds, ignoring the searing heat of the flames that licked at his uniform. What am I doing? Izuku's mind screamed in panic. I don't have a plan. I can't generate enough water in this heat to wash him away. You! The sludge villain gurgled, its bulbous eyes widening in recognition as the scaly teenager charged toward him. The kid from the tunnel, you think you can take me when I have this explosive brat's power? Die! The villain swung a massive, sludge-formed appendage, hurtling it toward Izuku like a battering ram. Izuku's golden eyes dilated. The world slowed down. His predatory instincts, perfectly married to his tactical, analytical mind, mapped out the trajectory of the attack. Izuku dug his claws into the pavement, and pivoted hard to the right. He swung his heavy tail around in a brutal, sweeping arc. The dense, armored scales collided with the incoming sludge whip, the sheer kinetic force of the 50-pound tail shattering the villain's attack and splattering muck across the burning storefronts. Ack! You little freak! The villain hissed. Izuku didn't stop moving. He scrambled up the side of a partially crushed car, using the elevated height to launch himself directly at the villain's main body. I can't use ambient water, Izuku calculated rapidly. I have to use my own reserves. High pressure, low volume. Surgical strikes. Mid-air, Izuku brought his hands together, his fingers forming a tight triangle. He tapped into the water pooling in his own cells, drawing the moisture up through his forearms. A swirling, pale blue orb of liquid manifested between his palms. He compressed it violently, the water vibrating with intense, pressurized energy. Water bullet, pressure shot! Izuku roared, his fangs bared. He thrust his hands forward. A stream of water, no thicker than a pencil but traveling at the speed of a fired bullet, erupted from his palms. The hyper-pressurized jet sliced cleanly through the searing air and struck the sludge villain directly in its right eye. The villain shrieked in absolute agony, the sludge holding Katsuki thrashing wildly as the creature was temporarily blinded. Izuku landed heavily on the pavement, his red shoes skidding. He gasped, a sharp ache radiating through his chest. Generating that much pressure from his internal reserves in such a dry environment felt like someone was wringing out his lungs like a sponge. But it worked. The villain's grip loosened. Izuku surged forward, ignoring the screaming protests of the pro-heroes behind him. He reached into the foul-smelling muck, his thick, scaly claws desperately tearing at the sludge wrapped around Katsuki's face. Katsuki tore his mouth free, gasping for air, soot and slime clinging to his face. He stared at the monstrous, scaly teenager furiously digging him out, his red eyes wide with shock. Deku? Katsuki coughed, smoke billowing from his lips. What the hell are you doing here? I didn't ask for your help, you damn swamp monster. Tears of fear and sheer adrenaline pricked the corners of Izuku's slitted eyes. He ripped another handful of sludge away, his muscles burning. I don't know! Izuku cried out, his voice cracking, a terrifying mixture of a teenage boy's sob and a predator's growl. My legs just moved on their own. Kaken, you looked like you needed saving. Katsuki's breath hitched. For a second, the fiery explosions and the roaring flames seemed to fade, leaving only the image of the crying, terrifying boy who had thrown away his own life to save him. You insolent, mutated little brat! The sludge villain roared, recovering from the eye strike. The villain's body swelled, drawing all of its mass upward to form a massive, towering tidal wave of toxic mud. I'll crush you both and take you as a matching set. Izuku looked up at the looming shadow of sludge. It was too big. He didn't have enough water left in his body to cut through something that massive. He was dizzy, his scales feeling dry and cracked from the heat. But he didn't run. Izuku firmly planted his feet, curling his massive tail around Katsuki's legs to anchor them both. He crossed his thick, armored arms over his face, preparing to take the full, lethal brunt of the villain's attack, shielding Katsuki with his own mutated body. If I'm going to die, Izuku thought, gritting his jagged teeth, I'll die keeping him safe. In the crowd, hidden among the terrified onlookers, a skeletal man with sunken blue eyes watched the scene unfold. Toshinori Yagi gripped his chest, his fingers digging into the fabric of his oversized white t-shirt. He had been standing there for minutes, paralyzed by his own weakness. He had dropped the bottle, he had caused this. And yet, he had told himself he couldn't act. His time limit was up. His organs were failing. He was pathetic. But then, he saw the boy from the tunnel. The boy who looked like a monster, who had tearfully asked if he could ever be a hero. Toshinori watched as this monster threw himself into an inferno without a second thought. He watched as the boy bled his own internal energy dry, risking severe dehydration and death, just to buy his rival a single breath of air. Pathetic, Toshinori thought, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth as he forced his broken body to expand. I am pathetic. I preach about being the symbol of peace, yet I stand by while a child who doubts his own humanity, acts as the truest hero of them all. Muscle mass violently inflated Toshinori's skeletal frame. The power of one for all roared to life, a blinding, golden star igniting in the depths of his chest. Pros are always risking their lives. That is the true test of a hero. Just as the massive wave of sludge descended to crush Izuku and Katsuki, the air pressure in the alleyway violently snapped. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the impact. It never came. Instead, a hand the size of a dinner plate clamped down on Izuku's scaly shoulder, pulling him and Katsuki firmly backward. Izuku's eyes snapped open. Standing in front of him, intercepting the villain's attack with a single, massive forearm, was a titan. I really am pathetic, All Might boomed, his voice echoing over the roar of the flames. Blood leaked from his legendary smile, but his eyes burned with an unyielding, righteous fury. All Might? The sludge villain shrieked in horror. I told you the traits that make a great champion, All Might roared, drawing his right fist back. The air around his arm began to distort, swirling into a visible vortex of immense kinetic pressure. But I failed to live up to my own ideals. Until you showed me the way, young Midoriya. Izuku's heart stopped. He remembered my name. All Might planted his feet. The concrete beneath him spiderwebbed into a massive crater. Detroit. All Might threw the punch. Smash! The sheer, unadulterated force of the blow defied the laws of physics. It wasn't just a shockwave. It was an atmospheric displacement. The wind pressure erupted from All Might's fist like a hurricane. It struck the sludge villain, tearing its liquid body into thousands of microscopic droplets in a fraction of a second. The wind didn't stop there. It blew down the street, instantly snuffing out the raging fires. It tore upward, striking the sky with such immense force that it physically shifted the weather patterns above Muzurifu. Silence descended upon the Tatooine shopping district. The fires were gone. The villain was gone. Izuku knelt on the cracked pavement, his chest heaving, his mouth dry as sandpaper. He looked up. A shadow fell over his face. He blinked, and a heavy drop of water hit his scaly cheek. Then another. And another. It was raining. All Might had punched the sky so hard, he created a rainstorm. Izuku tipped his head back, opening his mouth and letting the cool, life-saving rain wash over his dehydrated body. His scales, which had turned a dull, ashy green from the fire, instantly drank in the moisture, returning to their vibrant, polished emerald hue. He let out a long, rattling breath, collapsing forward onto his hands and knees. The silence was broken by the frantic cheers of the crowd. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, shouting paramedics, and severe scoldings. The pro-heroes had quickly corralled the scattered remains of the sludge villain, securely locking them away in hazmat containment units. Once the immediate danger was handled, their attention turned to the two teenagers sitting on the back of an ambulance. Katsuki Bakugo was being treated like royalty. Medics fussed over his minor burns, and pro-heroes practically lined up to praise him. "That quirk of yours is incredible, kid," Death Arms said, crossing his massive arms. "The fact that you held on that long against a villain that size shows serious stamina. When you graduate, my agency would love to have you." Katsuki sat hunched over, a towel draped over his head. He didn't look proud. He looked furious. He glared at the ground, his teeth grinding together so hard they squeaked. He didn't want their praise. He knew the truth. He had been helpless. A few feet away, Izuku was experiencing a very different kind of reception. "What were you thinking, kid?" Kamui Wood scolded, pointing a wooden finger at Izuku's chest. "You have no license. Charging in like that was completely reckless. You could have gotten yourself and the hostage killed." Death Arms walked over, his expression stern. He looked down at Izuku's thick tail, and the sharp claws resting on his knees. "Listen, kid. I know you've got a flashy mutant quirk. It's obvious you've got a lot of raw power in that physiology of yours. But power isn't everything. Your predatory instincts clearly took over. You completely ignored the perimeter and created a chaotic variable. We are professionals for a reason. Leave the hero work to us before your wild side gets someone hurt." Izuku shrank back, his tail curling tightly around his ankles in a submissive posture. The word stung. Predatory instincts. Wild side. Even when he tried to save someone, they still saw the beast. I'm sorry." Izuku bowed his head, staring at his scaly hands. "I know I broke the rules. I couldn't watch him die. Just let the police take your statement and go home." Kamui Wood sighed, shaking his head. "And get some water. You look terrible." An hour later, Izuku was finally released. He had chugged 3 bottles of water provided by the paramedics, but he still felt a bone-deep exhaustion. Using his internal water reserves had taken a massive toll on his ectothermic body. His limbs felt like lead, and his tail dragged heavily behind him, scraping against the damp sidewalk as he walked away from the shopping district. The sun was beginning to set, painting the Muzurifu sky in brilliant shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. Izuku walked in silence, his mind replaying the day's events. He had been reckless. He had been stupid. But he had saved Kaken. For a few seconds he had held the line. "Hey! Deku!" Izuku stopped, his ears twitching. He turned around slowly. Jogging down the street toward him, his school uniform still singed and smelling of smoke, was Katsuki Bakugo. He stopped a few feet away from Izuku, his chest heaving, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Izuku tensed slightly. "Kaken? Are you okay?" the paramedic said. "Shut up!" Katsuki snapped, though the usual venom in his voice was tempered by a strange, raw edge. "Don't you dare look down on me, you damn reptile!" Izuku blinked, taken aback. "Look down on you? Kaken, I would never." "Listen to me!" Katsuki yelled, taking a step forward. His red eyes locked onto Izuku's golden slits, burning with a fierce, unyielding pride. "I didn't need your help. I had it under control. I was just about to blast that sludge freak to Kingdom Come. So don't you dare think I owe you anything. You didn't save me. You just got in the way." Izuku stared at him. He could see the slight tremble in Katsuki's shoulders. He could see the complex storm of humiliation, gratitude, and fierce rivalry raging behind those red eyes. Katsuki's pride couldn't handle the fact that the kid he used to bully, the swamp monster, had risked his life for him. Izuku didn't get angry. He didn't argue. He just let out a soft, huffing breath, his lips twitching into a small, tired smile. Okay, Kaken, Izuku said softly. You had it under control. Katsuki glared at him for a long, silent moment, searching Izuku's scaly face for any sign of pity or mockery. Finding none, Katsuki scoffed, turning on his heel. I'm still gonna beat you to you, Deku, Katsuki threw over his shoulder as he stomped away. And when we get there, I'll prove my explosions are better than your swamp water. Izuku watched him go, a genuine warmth blooming in his chest. Yeah. We really are rivals now. Izuku turned to continue his walk home, when suddenly, from a side alleyway, a massive figure launched itself into the street, landing with a heavy, earth-shaking thud. I am here! All Might bellowed, striking a heroic pose, his fists planted on his hips, his blinding smile radiating in the fading twilight. Izuku screamed, stumbling backward, his heavy tail whipping around and accidentally smashing into a metal trash can, sending it flying into a brick wall. All Might? What are you doing here? How did you get away from the reporters? Ha ha ha! Evading reporters is child's play for the symbol of. All Might paused. His eyes bulged. He coughed violently. Poof! In a massive cloud of thick, white steam, the mountain of muscle vanished. Blood spurted from the cloud, splattering onto the pavement. When the steam cleared, the towering symbol of peace was gone. Standing in his place was a skeletal, emaciated man with sharp, angular features, hollow blue eyes, and messy blonde hair. He wore baggy clothes that hung off his bony frame like a scarecrow. He wiped a trail of blood from his chin, coughing weakly. Izuku's jaw dropped. His eyes widened to comical proportions, his slit pupils expanding rapidly. Ah? You deflated? You're a fake. An imposter. Where's the real All Might? Calm down, young man, the skeletal figure rasped, holding up a bony hand. I assure you, I am All Might. You know how guys at the pool suck in their gut to look buff? It's kind of like that. Izuku stared, entirely unconvinced. No, it's not. That defies the laws of biology. Your mass displacement is entirely inconsistent with. Quiet down! All Might sighed, lifting his shirt to reveal a horrifying, jagged mass of scar tissue that spiderwebbed across his entire left side. It looked like the center of his chest had been hollowed out. Izuku gasped, his hands flying to his mouth. 5 years ago, All Might explained, his voice low and serious, I suffered this injury in a fight against a toxic villain. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and my stomach was completely removed. I've had multiple surgeries, but the damage is permanent. Right now, I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. Izuku's mind raced, his fanbin knowledge kicking into overdrive. 5 years ago, was it the fight with Toxic Chainsaw? You know your stuff, All Might chuckled dryly. But no. I kept this fight under wraps. The public doesn't know. A symbol of peace who saves people with a smile must never be shown to be weak. The smile is just a brave face I put on to hide the pressure and the fear. All Might let his shirt drop, his hollow eyes locking onto Izuku. The man's gaze was piercing, stripping away Izuku's terrifying exterior and looking straight into his soul. I came here to thank you, young Midoriya, All Might said, taking a step forward. And to apologize. Izuku flinched, his tail wrapping around his legs again. Apologize? For what? I'm the one who got in the way. The pros yelled at me. They said my instincts made things worse. The pros are fools, All Might stated flatly, his voice carrying an undeniable weight of authority. They were blinded by protocol and their own fear. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't told me about my own hypocrisy, I would have stood in the crowd and watched that boy die. Izuku looked up, his golden eyes wide with shock. You asked me a question earlier, All Might continued, the wind rustling his baggy clothes. You asked if someone with the body of a monster, someone who fights a predatory instinct, could become a hero. Izuku held his breath. His heart hammered in his chest, drumming against his ribs like a frantic bird. All Might smiled. Not the booming, camera-ready smile of the symbol of peace, but a soft, genuine smile of a tired, grateful man. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days, All Might said softly. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Tears immediately welled up in Izuku's eyes. That was true for you today, wasn't it? Izuku couldn't speak. He squeezed his eyes shut, nodding frantically. The tears spilled over, tracing warm paths down the cold, hard scales of his cheeks. You are no monster, Izuku Midoriya, All Might declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. You are a young man with a fiercely heroic heart, trapped in a body that demands to be wild. I watched you bleed your own water dry to save a life. You have the spirit of a true hero. Izuku collapsed to his knees. The heavy tail thumped against the concrete. He covered his face with his scaled hands and wept. He wept for the years of self-doubt. He wept for the fear of his own instincts. He wept because the man he idolized above all others had looked past the beast and seen the boy. All Might approached slowly, placing a gentle, bony hand on Izuku's shaking shoulder. He let the boy cry for a few moments, the street quiet save for Izuku's sobs and the distant hum of traffic. However, All Might said, his tone shifting back to business. Izuku sniffled, looking up, wiping his eyes with the back of a scaly wrist. However, I also watched you fight, All Might said, his eyes narrowing critically. Your quirk is magnificent. The sheer kinetic force of your tail, the hyperpressurized hydrokinesis, the raw physical power of your mutation, it is the power of a natural disaster. But your control is terrible. Izuku flushed beneath his scales. I tried to control it. You tried to cage it, All Might corrected. I saw your eyes when you lunged at the villain. The predator took over for a moment, didn't it? You relied on raw, primal instinct to calculate your attack. And furthermore, your lack of understanding regarding your own biology is dangerous. You used your internal water reserves in a dry environment. You nearly sent yourself into a state of severe, life-threatening dehydration. Izuku looked at the ground. I know. The doctor told me I'm ectothermic, and need to watch my hydration, but in the heat of the moment, a hero must be in absolute control of his mind and body, All Might interrupted. If you go to Yuri High School with this lack of discipline, your power will consume you. Your instincts will override your rational mind in a real crisis, and you will become the very monster you fear. Izuku swallowed hard, the harsh truth of the words sinking in. Then, what do I do? How do I fix it? All Might stepped back, crossing his arms, a fiery determination returning to his hollow eyes. You don't fix it alone. You need guidance. You need someone to teach you how to marry the mind of a hero with the instincts of an apex predator. Someone to push your body to its absolute limits so you learn its boundaries. All Might pointed a bony finger directly at Izuku's chest. I am offering to be that guide, Izuku Midoriya. I want to train you. Izuku's jaw dropped so fast his teeth clicked together. Why you want to train me? All Might wants to be my mentor? Do not think it will be easy, All Might warned, a terrifying, skeletal grin spreading across his face. The UA entrance exam is exactly 10 months away. I have a grueling, borderline torturous regimen planned for you. I will teach you how to harness your water without draining your life force. I will teach you how to channel your predatory tracking into martial arts. I will break you down, and build you into a hero that the world will revere, not fear. Izuku stared at the skeletal man. He looked at his own hands, the sharp claws, the dark green scales. He felt the heavy weight of his tail behind him. He felt the hum of moisture in the cool evening air. He didn't need to think about it. The answer was already in his blood. Izuku stood up, wiping the last of the tears from his eyes. He stood at his full height, his broad shoulders squared, his tail rising off the ground in a posture of absolute readiness. His golden eyes locked onto All Might's blue ones, burning with an unyielding, predatory focus. I'll do it, Izuku said, his voice dropping into a calm, confident rumble. I'll do whatever it takes. I will master the beast, and I will become a hero. All Might's grin widened. Excellent. Then rest well tonight, young Midoriya. Because tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., your hell begins at Takoba Municipal Beach Park. Izuku nodded firmly. As All Might walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the alleyway, Izuku looked up at the stars beginning to pierce the twilight sky. The fear was gone. The anxiety had been washed away. For the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya didn't feel like a boy pretending to be brave, nor a monster trying to be gentle. He was the river tyrant. And he was going to UA High School. 10 months. To a normal teenager, 10 months was just another school year. It was a blur of homework, exams, and weekend hangouts. But to Izuku Midoriya, the last 10 months had been a crucible, a grueling, relentless forging process that had taken the raw, volatile ore of his mutated body and hammered it into tempered steel. The alarm clock on his desk buzzed to life at 4 a.m., but Izuku was already awake. He was lying on his stomach, the only comfortable position given the massive appendage attached to his spine, staring at the ceiling. He rolled out of bed, his heavy feet hitting the floorboards with a muffled thud. He walked over to the full-length mirror attached to his closet door, and stared at his reflection in the pre-dawn gloom. He hardly recognized the boy from a year ago. Cleaning the illegal trash dump at Takoba Municipal Beach under All Might's relentless supervision had radically transformed him. Hauling refrigerators, crushed cars, and rusted steel girders through the deep, shifting sands had forced his muscles to adapt to the incredible density of his own crocodilian mutation. His shoulders had broadened significantly, thick with striated muscle. His core was an impenetrable wall of abs and obliques, designed by nature to anchor the tremendous swinging force of his tail. The dark emerald scales that armored his forearms, shins, and back had grown thicker, overlapping perfectly like ancient samurai armor. They possessed a dull, obsidian sheen, hard enough to deflect a low-caliber bullet. His jawline was sharper, dotted with hardened, protective scuts, and his teeth were undeniably lethal. Rows of perfectly white, serrated fangs rested behind his lips. But the most significant change wasn't physical. It was in his eyes. The vertical, golden slit pupils no longer darted around in a constant state of nervous panic. They were still, focused, and piercing. All Might hadn't just trained his body, he had trained his mind. Through brutal martial arts sparring and intense meditation exercises, Izuku had finally stopped fighting the predator inside his head. Instead, he had negotiated a truce with it. He didn't lock the beast in a cage anymore. He put it on a leash, holding the collar firmly in his rational, heroic hands. The instincts were there, the hyper-awareness, the urge to hunt, the cold-blooded calculation of a threat, but he was the one directing them. Izuku reached for the massive, 1.5-gallon insulated water jug resting on his desk. He unscrewed the cap and downed a third of it in a single, continuous gulp. The cool water flooded his system, hydrating his ectothermic biology, and staving off the sluggishness of the early morning. Izuku? Are you awake, honey? His bedroom door creaked open, and Inko Midoriya peeked inside. She was holding a freshly ironed middle school uniform, his last time wearing it. I'm up, Mom, Izuku rumbled softly, wiping a stray drop of water from his chin with the back of a scaly wrist. Inko stepped into the room, looking up at her son. He towered over her now. She reached out, her small hands gently patting the thick, armored scales on his bicep. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. You work so hard, she whispered, her voice trembling with pride. Every morning, every evening. You never complained. You just kept pushing. Izuku smiled, a gentle expression that completely contradicted his fearsome visage. His thick tail, resting heavily on the floor, gave a slow, rhythmic thump against the wood, his equivalent of a happy wag. I had to, Mom. If I want to stand on the same stage as Kaken, if I want to be a hero who can protect everyone, I have to be the strongest. Inko pulled him into a hug, her arms barely reaching around his broad back. You already are, Izuku. To me, you've always been a hero. Now go show UA High School what the river tyrant can do. The morning sun was bright and unyielding by the time Izuku arrived at the towering, glass and steel gates of UA High School. The campus was massive, a sprawling complex of state-of-the-art facilities that looked more like a military base than a high school. Hundreds of prospective students were pouring through the gates, a sea of anxious faces and bizarre quirks. But even among the diverse crowd, Izuku stood out. As he marched up the paved walkway, the crowd naturally parted for him. It wasn't intentional on their part. It was a subconscious, biological reaction. The sheer mass of his body, the heavy, scraping thud drag of his 6-foot tail, and the sharp, predatory focus in his glowing eyes triggered a primal give-way response in the other teenagers. They stared, whispering to one another, eyes wide at the sight of the heavily mutated boy. Izuku ignored them, taking a slow sip from his water jug. His tapetum lucidum adjusted to the bright sunlight, his pupils shrinking to hair-thin vertical lines. He was analyzing his environment. Wind speed low. Humidity, 65%. Ambient moisture, adequate. Out of my way, swamp monster. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head. He simply shifted his tail an inch to the right, allowing the explosive ash-blonde teenager to stride past him. Katsuki Bakugo looked just as fierce as ever. He paused, looking over his shoulder at Izuku. Katsuki's red eyes scanned the new breadth of Izuku's shoulders and the terrifying, calm focus in his gaze. 10 months ago, Katsuki would have yelled. He would have sparked explosions to assert his dominance. Today, he just scoffed, a tight, competitive grin pulling at the corner of his mouth. Don't trip over your own tail in there, Deku. I want you at your best so I can crush you. Izuku lowered his water jug, his fangs catching the sunlight in a sharp smile. You're going to have to swim pretty fast to catch me, Kaken. Katsuki clicked his tongue and shoved his hands into his pockets, storming ahead toward the auditorium. Izuku watched him go, feeling a familiar thrill of rivalry warming his blood. He took a step forward, his mind so focused on the upcoming exam that he momentarily forgot the spatial awareness required for his heavy frame. The tip of his tail snagged on an uneven paving stone. Izuku's center of gravity pitched forward violently. Oh no, Izuku thought, the fearsome apex predator suddenly replaced by a clumsy teenager. I'm going to face-plant in front of everyone. He braced for the impact, his eyes squeezing shut. But the concrete never hit him. Instead, a strange sense of weightlessness washed over his body. The immense, crushing gravity of his dense muscles and heavy scales vanished. He opened his eyes, finding himself hovering an inch above the ground, his arms flailing comically. Are you okay? A cheerful voice chirped. Izuku twisted around in midair. Standing beside him was a girl with a round face, rosy cheeks, and short, bobbed brown hair. She had one hand pressed flat against the thick scales of his forearm. I used my quirk on you. Sorry for not asking first, she smiled brightly, completely unfazed by his terrifying appearance. But it would be bad luck if you fell right before the exam, right? Izuku's brain short-circuited. A girl is touching me. She's not scared of my scales. She's talking to me. He flushed a deep, vibrant crimson beneath his green plating. Why yes. Thank you? I mean, I'm sorry. My tail it's heavy, the girl giggled, pressing her fingertips together. Release. Gravity snapped back into place. Izuku hit the ground with a heavy thud, his knees bending to absorb the tremendous weight of his own body. I'm Ochiko Uraraka. She beamed, waving her hand. Good luck in there. You look super strong. Before Izuku could form a coherent sentence, she bounded away into the crowd. Izuku stood frozen, his jaw slightly open, staring after her. She said I look strong. Not scary. Strong. A newfound surge of confidence flooded his veins. He gripped the strap of his water jug tightly, his slit pupils expanding. It was time to hunt. The orientation in the massive auditorium was a blur of noise. The voice hero, Present Mike, stood on the stage, projecting his voice at ear-splitting decibels as he explained the rules of the entrance exam. It was a practical combat test. They would be released into mock city arenas and tasked with destroying robotic villains assigned different point values, 1, 2, and 3 points. There was also a 0-pointer, an obstacle designed to be avoided. Izuku sat in the darkened auditorium, his hands resting on his knees. While the rest of the applicants murmured nervously or shouted responses to Present Mike, Izuku was perfectly still. His mind was dissecting the rules. Robots. Inorganic targets. That means no blood, no hesitation from my predatory instincts regarding lethal force. I can go all out. The arena is a city. Lots of concrete. Low ambient moisture if the sun bakes the streets. I need to conserve my internal hydration. Excuse me, A tall, stiffly postured boy with glasses stood up rows ahead, pointing a rigid finger at the stage. There are 4 types of villains on this printout. If this is a misprint, you should be ashamed. The boy then turned, his glasses flashing in the dark, and pointed directly at Izuku. And you, with the large tail. You've been breathing heavily and shifting in your seat. It's distracting. If you're here for a pleasure trip, leave. The auditorium went dead silent. Everyone turned to look at the massive, scaly teenager. Izuku didn't shrink under the spotlight. He simply blinked, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on his clasped hands. I apologize if my biology offends you, Izuku rumbled, his voice calm but carrying a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in the chests of those sitting nearby. My respiration is tied to the ambient humidity in this crowded room. I am simply acclimating my internal temperature for the combat exam. I suggest you focus on your own preparations, rather than policing the physiological needs of others. The bespectacled boy stiffened, a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He bowed rigidly. I see. I apologize for my assumption. He quickly sat back down. President Mike coughed into his microphone, breaking the tension. Right. Thanks for the intervention, examinee 7111. Now, let's get to the main event. Plus Ultra, Test Center, City Beta. Izuku stood before the towering steel gates of the mock city. The scale of UA's funding was staggering. It was an entire metropolis built solely for destruction. He was wearing his specially modified track pants, heavily reinforced at the seams, with a large gap tailored for his tail. He wore a tight, sleeveless black compression shirt that showed off the thick green scales running up his arms and shoulders. He took one final, massive gulp from his water jug, draining it completely, and set it down by the exterior wall. He closed his eyes. He felt the sun on his face. He felt the slight, dry breeze. He reached inward, feeling the massive reservoir of hydration stored within his muscles and cellular structure. Breathe. Heart rate down. Track. Hunt. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice blasted from hidden speakers. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run! The other examinees hesitated, confused by the sudden start. Izuku didn't. His eyes snapped open. The golden slits narrowed to pinpricks. He didn't run upright. He threw his upper body forward, his massive hands slamming into the concrete. His thick legs coiled like industrial springs. Boom! The concrete beneath his feet cracked as he launched himself forward on all fours, his heavy tail acting as a counterbalance. He shot through the massive gates like a green torpedo, entirely bypassing the human speed limit. Whoa! Look at that guy go! Someone shouted from behind. Izuku was already a block deep into the city. His heightened hearing caught the mechanical whirring of gears and the heavy thud of metal on pavement. Target acquired. A 1-point robot rolled out from an alleyway, its single red optical sensor locking onto Izuku. Target sighted. Commencing elimination. Izuku didn't even break his stride. As he sprinted on all fours, he violently whipped his hips to the right. His 50-pound tail, moving with the kinetic force of a wrecking ball, slammed directly into the robot's central chassis. The sound of twisting, shrieking metal echoed off the buildings as the one-pointer was practically folded in half, exploding into a shower of sparks and loose bolts. 1 point. Two 2-point robots rounded the corner ahead, raising their mechanical appendages. Izuku realized sprinting on all fours was burning too much physical energy. He needed efficiency. He tapped into his hydrokinesis. He didn't summon a massive wave. Instead, he secreted a highly condensed, millimeter-thick layer of water directly from the pores of his heavily scaled forearms and shins. He dropped onto his stomach, crossing his arms in front of him. The water acted as a frictionless lubricant. The momentum from his sprint sent him sliding across the rough asphalt with the terrifying, silent speed of an ice skater. The 2-pointers fired their rubber bullets. Izuku, sliding at over 40 miles an hour, effortlessly weaved between the projectiles by subtly shifting his weight. As he slid into the space between the two machines, he opened his jaw. He drew a fraction of water from his internal reserves, compressing it violently at the back of his throat. Pressure shot. he hissed. He whipped his head left, then right. 2 hyper-pressurized, needle-thin jets of water erupted from his fangs. The water traveled so fast it shrieked, slicing cleanly through the optical sensors and internal wiring of both robots. They short-circuited instantly, crashing into the buildings on either side. 5 points. Izuku stood up from his slide, his scales completely unharmed by the friction. He let out a low, rumbling growl, a smile stretching across his face. This wasn't an exam. This was an ecosystem. And he was the apex predator. For the next 8 minutes, City Beta became Izuku Midoriya's personal hunting ground. He moved with a breathtaking synthesis of raw, primal ferocity and calculated, surgical precision. When a group of 3 3-point robots cornered him in a plaza, he didn't waste his water reserves. He simply grabbed a lamppost, his immense grip strength easily tearing the steel from its concrete foundation, and used it as a massive baseball bat, shattering their armor plates. When a robot tried to ambush him from above, his tapetum lucidum caught the shifting shadows. He aimed his palms upward, firing 2 concentrated bursts of water pressure that blasted the machine out of the sky before it even began its descent. He was a blur of dark green scales, devastating kinetic impacts, and flashing water jets. He didn't realize that in the observation room, the UA teachers were watching his feed in stunned silence. "Look at examinee 18, a woman with midnight black hair noted, tapping the screen. His physical mutations give him the strength and mobility of a high-end combat Quirks, but he's augmenting his movements with precise hydrokinesis. He's making himself frictionless to conserve stamina. His situational awareness is terrifying," a hollow, skeletal man in a yellow suit thought to himself, grinning wildly. "You've mastered the beast, my boy. He has 45 villain points already," a gruff, tired voice muttered from the corner of the room. A man wrapped in bandages stared intensely at the screen. "But it's too clean. He's in his element because he's hunting prey that can't fight back effectively. Let's see how the predator handles a true threat." A paw slammed down on a large red button on the console. Back in City Beta, Izuku had just crushed his 52nd point when the ground violently shuddered. It wasn't a localized tremor. The entire mock city groaned as if an earthquake had struck. Izuku dropped into a defensive crouch, his tail planting firmly into the asphalt to stabilize his core. His slitted eyes darted around, trying to locate the source. At the end of the main avenue, a towering shadow eclipsed the sun. The buildings on either side of the street shattered like glass as an absolutely colossal machine tore through them. It was easily the size of a skyscraper, rolling forward on massive treads. Its singular red eye burned like a demonic sun. The 0-pointer. The sheer scale of the machine sent a shockwave of primal terror straight into Izuku's hindbrain. The predatory instinct, which had been confidently guiding his hunt, suddenly reversed course. Threat level, apex. Unwinnable. Flee. Survive. The instinct was overwhelming. Izuku's legs locked up, his muscles demanding that he turn and run. The other examinees in the area were already doing just that, screaming in panic as they sprinted away from the lumbering behemoth. Izuku took a step back. "It's worth 0 points. There's no reason to fight it. All Might told me to pick my battles. Run." He turned, preparing to slide away. "I'll help." The sound was faint, barely cutting through the grinding gears and crashing rubble of the 0-pointer's advance. But Izuku's crocodile hearing picked it up perfectly. He snapped his head back. There, trapped beneath a massive chunk of debris that had fallen from a crushed building, was the round-faced girl. Uraraka. She was pinned by the legs, her hands desperately trying to use her quirk on the rubble, but she was too exhausted. The 0-pointer's massive tread was rolling directly toward her. She was going to be crushed. The predator in Izuku's mind screamed at him to run. Prey caught in a trap. Leave it. Survive. But Izuku Midoriya was not a beast. He remembered the feeling of All Might's hand on his shoulder. "You have the spirit of a true hero." "Shut up," Izuku snarled, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, luminescent intensity as he forced his instincts down. "I am not running away," he exploded forward. He bypassed the fleeing examinees, a blur of green and terrifying intent. The 0-pointer was massive, its armor plating easily a foot thick. Blunt force from his tail wouldn't dent it. Low-volume pressure shots wouldn't do enough structural damage in time. He had to go all out. He had to use the ultimate technique he had been conceptualizing in his notebooks, the one he had barely managed to practice without exhausting himself. As Izuku closed the distance, he threw his arms out wide. He didn't just tap into his internal reserves, he tore the floodgates wide open. His body began to steam as massive amounts of water poured from his pores. He drew it to his forearms and up toward his jaw. But he didn't just let the water sit there. He forced it to spin. Using his hydrokinesis, he aggressively rotated the condensed water around his forearms and across the hardened scales of his jawline. Faster and faster, the water began to shriek, vibrating at a frequency so high it visibly blurred the air around him. It was a localized, hyper-pressurized aquatic chainsaw, water cutter blade, Tyrant's Maw. Izuku roared. He didn't aim for the massive body. He aimed for the weak point. The massive hydraulic joint connecting the tread to the main chassis. Izuku leapt into the air, his powerful legs launching him 3 stories high. He twisted his body, aiming his swirling, hydro-bladed arms and jaw directly at the joint. He struck the steel. The sound was deafening, a horrific screech of pressurized water tearing through reinforced alloy. The water cutter blade, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, sliced into the thick metal like a hot knife through butter. Izuku used his physical weight and the momentum of his fall to drag the water blades violently downward. Screech! He physically amputated the massive joint. Hydraulics burst, spraying black oil everywhere. With its primary support structure severed on the left side, the colossal zero-pointer violently listed. It groaned, its center of gravity failing, and began to tip backward, crashing into a row of unoccupied buildings in a colossal explosion of dust and metal. Izuku landed heavily on the pavement, his chest heaving. The water around his arms splashed to the ground, his internal reserves dangerously low. He felt a wave of dizzying exhaustion hit him, his scales feeling tight and dry. But he didn't stop. He scrambled over to Uraraka. "Are you okay?" he gasped, grabbing the massive chunk of rubble pinning her. He dug his claws underneath it, and, with a terrifying display of raw physical power, heaved the ton of concrete off her legs with a loud grunt. Uraraka stared up at him, her eyes wide with shock and awe. She looked at his sharp fangs, the dark scales, the massive tail. He looked like a monster straight out of a nightmare, covered in dust and oil. But his eyes, the golden, slitted eyes, were entirely human, filled with nothing but desperate concern. "Can you walk?" Izuku asked, his voice rough. I think my ankle is twisted," she winced. Izuku didn't hesitate. He turned his broad back to her, dropping to one knee. "Climb on. My scales are hard, they won't hurt." Uraraka carefully wrapped her arms around his thick neck, settling onto his broad back. Izuku stood up effortlessly, his tail shifting to support their combined weight. "Time's up." Present Mix's voice echoed across the ruined city. A heavy silence fell over the exam site, broken only by the crackle of localized fires and the settling dust. The other examinees, who had stopped fleeing to watch the spectacle, slowly emerged from the dust clouds. They stared at the downed zero-pointer, and then at the heavily mutated teenager carrying the injured girl. Izuku took a deep breath, adjusting Uraraka on his back. He was completely exhausted, borderline dehydrated, and his muscles ached. But as he walked toward the exit gates, he couldn't stop the sharp, fanged grin from spreading across his face. "I did it, All Might. I didn't run." Midoriya Izuku, the holographic projection of All Might, glowing proudly in the center of Izuku's dark bedroom, practically vibrated with energy. Izuku sat on his bed, his tail coiled tightly around his legs, his hands gripping his knees. It had been a week since the exam. "You passed the written test with flying colors." Hologram All Might boomed. "And in the practical, you scored a massive 52 villain points." Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He had passed. He had really passed. But that is not all. The projection continued. "A hero course that only evaluates combat is fundamentally flawed. How could we ignore someone who risks their life to save another?" A small video clip played in the corner of the projection, showing Izuku tearing through the zero-pointer's leg and carrying Uraraka to safety. Rescue points. Given by a panel of judges. Izuku Midoriya. 60 rescue points. For a staggering total of 112 points. You placed first in the exam. Izuku's eyes widened. First place. He had beaten Kaken. He had beaten everyone. Come, young Midoriya, All Might smiled, holding out a hand. This is your Hero Academia. Izuku fell back onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. A single tear rolled down his scaly cheek. He let out a low, rumbling laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. The first day of classes at Yui High School was supposed to be about orientations, syllabuses, and getting to know the campus. Izuku should have known better. He walked into Class 1A, his heavy tail dragging slightly on the polished floors. The classroom was massive, designed to accommodate quirks of all shapes and sizes. He immediately spotted Katsuki, who was sitting with his feet on his desk, aggressively arguing with the stiff, bespectacled boy from the auditorium. Tenya Ida, Izuku had learned. Deku, Katsuki growled as Izuku walked in, his red eyes flashing. Don't think that ridiculous score means you're better than me. The combat exam was rigged for flashy quirks. When it comes to real fighting, I'll still blast your scales off. Good morning to you too, Kaken, Izuku smiled serenely, taking his seat behind the explosive blonde. He had specifically requested a modified chair, and the school had provided one with an open back to accommodate his tail. Oh! It's you! Izuku turned to see Uraraka standing in the doorway, her face lighting up. The boy who saved me. Midoriya, right? Your quirk is so amazing. You looked like a giant water dragon slicing through that robot. Izuku flushed, rubbing the back of his neck with a scaly hand. It was nothing, really. I just reacted. If you're just going to play buddy-buddy, pack up and leave. The voice was tired, flat, and entirely devoid of enthusiasm. The class froze. Lying in a yellow sleeping bag on the floor at the front of the room was a disheveled man with unkempt black hair and heavy bags under his eyes. He unzipped the sleeping bag and stood up, sipping from a juice pouch. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, the man sighed, his dark eyes sweeping over the room. Time is a limited resource. You kids aren't rational enough. Izuku's slitted eyes narrowed. His predatory instincts flared immediately, recognizing the aura of the man in front of them. This wasn't a teacher. This was a seasoned, lethal combatant. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa, the man said, pulling a blue track suit from his sleeping bag. Put these on and head out to the training grounds. We're doing a quirk apprehension test. A quirk apprehension test? The class chorused. What about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked nervously. Aizawa shot her a flat glare. Yui is not tethered to traditions. We do things our way. If you want to be heroes, you don't have time for leisurely events. 10 minutes later, Class 1A stood on the expansive dirt field of the P grounds. The sun was hot, baking the dirt and sending waves of dry heat into the air. Izuku took a long drink from his water jug, feeling the dry air pulling the moisture from his scales. Bakugo, Aizawa called out, holding a tablet. You finished second in the practical exam. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? 67 meters, Katsuki scoffed. Try doing it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed him a softball. You can do whatever you want, as long as you stay in the circle. Katsuki stepped up to the pitcher's circle. He rolled his shoulder, a ferocious grin spreading across his face. He wound up, his palm igniting with a terrifying combination of sweat and kinetic fury. Die! Katsuki roared, launching the ball with a massive explosion that shook the ground. The ball rocketed into the sky, propelled by the blast wave. Aizawa held up his device. It read 705.2 meters. The class erupted in shock and excitement. Awesome! We get to use our quirks. This looks like so much fun. Aizawa's eyes darkened. His hair suddenly defied gravity, floating wildly around his face as the heavy scarves around his neck unfurled like angry serpents. Fun? Aizawa's voice dropped to a terrifying whisper. You have 3 years to become heroes. Are you going to maintain that attitude the whole time? Fine. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 events will be judged as having no potential, and will be expelled immediately. The excitement evaporated instantly, replaced by a suffocating tension. Izuku's tail twitched anxiously. Expelled on the first day? Welcome to UA's hero course, Aizawa smiled darkly. The test began, and Izuku quickly realized why he had trained so hard. In the 50-meter dash, he didn't run. He secreted a thin layer of water beneath his specialized shoes and used his hydrokinesis to propel himself forward in a frictionless slide, crossing the finish line in a terrifying 3.04 seconds. In the grip strength test, his crocodilian musculature took over. He squeezed the electronic dynamometer so hard the digital screen shattered and the metal casing warped, maxing out the machine. But as the test progressed, Izuku felt Aizawa's eyes on him. It wasn't the impressed gaze of All Might. It was the critical, scrutinizing gaze of a hunter watching a dangerous animal. Finally, it was time for the softball throw. Izuku stepped into the circle. He held the small, white ball in his massive, clawed hand. He looked out at the open field. If I use my arm, my muscle density alone will send it far. But if I use my hydrokinesis to create a pressurized barrel, no, the air is too dry. I shouldn't waste internal water on a simple throw. I'll use my mutation. Izuku turned his back to the field. He squatted down low. He placed the soft ball gently against the dirt. Then, he curled the tip of his massive, heavy tail around the ball. The class watched in confusion. What is he doing? Ida whispered. Izuku took a deep breath. His golden eyes locked onto the sky. With a roar that sounded more like a prehistoric beast than a teenager, Izuku unleashed his core strength. He whipped his hips forward, using his entire body as a fulcrum. The 50-pound, heavily armored tail snapped forward with the speed and kinetic energy of an industrial trebuchet. Crack! The sound of the tail breaking the sound barrier echoed across the field like a gunshot. The ball didn't just fly, it vanished into the stratosphere, leaving a visible trail of displaced air in its wake. Aizawa didn't blink. He held up his device. 810.5 meters. The class gasped. Izuku stood up, letting his tail settle heavily onto the dirt. He turned to Aizawa, expecting a nod of approval. Instead, Aizawa stepped forward, his capture weapon unfurling slightly. His eyes were cold and unreadable. Midoriya, Aizawa said, his voice carrying clearly over the field. Your power is immense. The physical output of your mutation is undeniable. But you lack restraint. Izuku blinked, confused. Sir, I watched you during the entrance exam, Aizawa stated bluntly. When you attacked the zero-pointer, your eyes changed. Your posture changed. You allowed a predatory instinct to dictate a hyperlethal strike. You used a localized water cutter that could have easily decapitated a person. Izuku stiffened, his scales flattening against his skin. You rely heavily on the beast when you are pressured, Aizawa continued, stepping closer, entirely unafraid of Izuku's towering, monstrous frame. If you lose your rational mind in the field, if you let that cold-blooded instinct take the wheel during a rescue operation with fragile civilians, you won't save them. You'll mangle them. If you cannot perfectly control the monster, you have no business being a hero. You'll be put down like a wild animal. The words cut deeper than any physical blow. The class was dead silent, staring at Izuku. Katsuki watched with narrowed, scrutinizing eyes. Izuku looked down at his clawed hands. Aizawa was right. The water cutter had been an instinctive, lethal maneuver designed to kill prey, adapted forcefully to destroy a robot. It was a terrifyingly dangerous technique. Izuku clenched his fists, his fangs baring slightly, not in anger, but in determination. He looked up, meeting Aizawa's intimidating glare with his own piercing, glowing slit pupils. I understand, Sensei, Izuku rumbled, his voice perfectly steady. I have a lot to learn about control. But I am not a wild animal. I hold the leash, and I will prove to you that my instincts can be used to protect, not just destroy. Aizawa stared at the boy for a long moment. He saw the fire, the unwavering heroic spirit trapped within the terrifying shell. The corner of Aizawa's mouth twitched upward in a microscopic, almost invisible smile. We'll see, Midoriya, Aizawa said, turning back to his tablet. Next up, Uraraka. As Izuku walked back to the group, Katsuki bumped his shoulder against Izuku's massive arm. Don't let the hobo get in your head, swamp monster, Katsuki muttered, staring straight ahead. You're not allowed to get expelled until I beat you into the ground. Izuku smiled, a genuine, warm expression that completely contrasted his lethal appearance. I'll be waiting, Kaken. The apex predator had claimed his territory at UA High. But the true test of holding the leash had only just begun.